Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at Sloat's webinars. We are excited to have Dan Alexander here today from Mill Valley talking about peppers. Going to give everybody a couple of minutes to get in and get signed on. I'm Shannon, from the Martinez store. Excited to be here and be moderating today. Just to kind of update you on what's coming up soon. We've got a bunch of new webinars coming. Obviously today is Peppers 101. Next week, Taylor is going to be talking about succulents and doing succulent containers. Let's see, berries are coming up. We're excited to have our summer series, which is going to start out with summer cocktails and how to grow a little herb garden that you can make your own summer cocktails out of. So as I said, just waiting for people to kind of file in. Excited about you guys all being here today. We'll be taking questions throughout the webinar, and then we'll be saving some for the end for Dan to answer on his own. If you have anything, feel free to go ahead and post it and we'll answer as often as we can. And then we'll talk again at the end. Again, really excited to have you all here. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Peppers 101. And let's get going whenever you're ready, Dan.
I'm ready. Hi, y'all. Dan Alexander in Mill Valley here at the Miller Avenue Sloat. We're going to talk about peppers, how to grow them, how to select them, how to find a spot where they will thrive, and the ins and outs of, I think they have become my favorite vegetable to grow. They are a beautiful little plant, much more manageable than a tomato. And by the end of the season, still pretty in the garden after the tomatoes have succumbed to their various diseases. So I am becoming an advocate for pepper plants in all ways. Peppers have a wonderful long ethnobotanical history dating back at least 7,500 years, starting out in the area between the Amazon and the Andes in Bolivia, and making their way throughout South America and Mesoamerica. And along the way, developing into hundreds and hundreds of different varieties that humans have selected as being of value to eat. The original peppers seem to have been designed to be pollinated by birds. So they developed a rather fragile seed and had to have a way to keep mammals particularly from eating the fruits and chewing the seeds to bits so that they couldn't get started. And that's how the capsaicins came about, to give the hot flavor to the pepper, which mammals don't like, but birds don't seem to distinguish. So the original peppers were plants that had little tiny peppers that stuck straight up for the birds to pick. They had flowers that were upwards facing as well, and they had stems that came off very easily so that the birds could pick them, eat them, pass them through, drop them somewhere else with a little pile of fertilizer right with them, and spread them about. And from those humble beginnings of little tiny, probably very hot peppers came the vast variety of peppers that we know today. There are 5 species of peppers, unlike, say, eggplant or potatoes or tomatoes, which all have a lot of varieties but have only one species. Peppers actually have 5 domesticated species, and 95% of the peppers that you and I know are from one of those, which is called Capsicum annuum. Now, due to the vagaries of probably 18th century botanical knowledge, that species was given the name annuum, which means annual. In fact, all peppers are perennials, which means they live more than one season in their tropical homeland, but they're extremely frost sensitive, and a little bit of frost will kill them right down to the ground. So we treat them generally as annuals. They're just misnamed from a botanical point of view. Another of the species, called Capsicum chinense, means from China, and none of them are actually from China. That is to say, originally. They're all from South America. But once a botanist names a plant, it keeps that name, even though we learn that it's wrong. But it's that name forever. So the ethnobotany, they're able to do that because they can find pollen grains from peppers that are 7,000 years old. And they can also find traces of the capsaicins that make them hot. And the chemicals stick around on things like pottery and rocks in the evidence of towns and cities that existed back that far. And there we have evidence of the ancientness of peppers. They traveled with the Spanish conquistadores and with the Spanish trade routes over to the Philippines from Veracruz, and then spread into Asia, subsequently to India, and ultimately to Europe as well. And of course, Asia has now its own peppers. We could say India has its own peppers. Mexico has its peppers, South America, and now the United States have developed a number of peppers as well. If you're like me and had a relatively mundane upbringing from a food point of view, you thought the pepper was a green bell pepper, and that was probably about it. And I have to say that the green bell pepper is the boringest, blandest of all the possible peppers that one could ever eat. And so we sort of got gypped if you came up culturally the way I did. And it's only in the last few years that I've learned that not only the hot peppers, but there's such a variety of sweet peppers that one can grow and eat and prepare in various ways. So I guess a caveat, first of all, I'm not a chili head. I don't appreciate really hot peppers. I can't taste the flavors over the heat. So that lets me out of the fiery pepper competitions. And I'm not a chef, although I do cook with peppers and I grow them for my kitchen garden at home. Now, the different varieties of Capsicum annuum, most of the peppers that we will find, vary from sweet, meaning 0 on the Scoville unit chart. Scoville units are a way of diluting the capsicums in a given pepper and giving them to people at stronger and stronger doses until they scream. Well, actually, until they can notice it. And so each pepper has been given a Scoville unit heat rating, and it would go from your bell pepper is at 0 into things like poblano peppers, which are just mildly hot and might be in the 100 to 500 range, and then up to jalapenos, which will get into the 1,000 range, and to serranos, which will get into the 10,000 range. And then you start getting serious after that. Now, For me, Serrano is about my limit. But this is a ghost pepper, a Buchalokia, which clocks in at more than 1 million Scoville units. It was at one time the hottest pepper in the Guinness Book of World Records, but was then eclipsed by the Carolina Reaper, which is several million Scoville units. And wonderfully enough, there are people who can just pop those and eat them. Maybe they suffer a little bit, but they can do it, and they will also appreciate the flavor of them. Now, some of the hottest pepper that you'll find probably in the grocery store is the habanero. Here's a habanero picture. And they're pretty darn hot. But they're also very, if you can taste the flavor, they're very fruity and flavorful, and are used mostly, I think, in chilies and in sauces. On the other hand, you'll find a pepper like a shishito, which I've learned to pronounce properly. I used to say shishito, but it's shishito, Japanese pepper, which is often in the hot pepper, the chili pepper section of the seed cabinet, but I put them in the sweet pepper category because only about 1 in 10 has any heat, and the rest of them are all perfectly sweet, no heat whatsoever. This is true of the padron pepper as well, which looks very similar to a shishito, is from Spain, and about 1 in 10 will be a little spicy, not terribly spicy. Peppers are one of the big four of the potato family that gives the world a lot of its food, the others being tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplant. And of those, the tomatoes, potatoes, and peppers are all what we call New World plants. They started here in the Western Hemisphere in South America. And the peppers need pretty much the same conditions as tomatoes to grow, which means full sun. And full sun we define as 6 hours of sun between about 10 and 4. The sunshine before 10 o'clock and after 4 o'clock is not really strong enough to be counted. They need warm nights, which in the Bay Area is a challenge. A warm night is a night warmer than 50 degrees. For instance, right now in May, we are still getting nights under 50 degrees regularly. I've only seen a couple of 50-degree nights here in this area. There are probably a few more in some of the sunnier locations in the East Bay. You may be getting up above 50. And they need daytime temperatures that are between 70 and 85 would be ideal. A fairly large range for the daytime temperatures, but the nighttime temperatures, they really appreciate above 50 degrees, similar to tomatoes. We can increase night temperatures by placing plants in a south-facing location with a wall behind them to absorb heat during the day and radiate that heat out during the night. So for instance, if you have a patio or a deck that faces south and you can place the plants close to the house, that will increase their happiness. Similarly, if you have a concrete patio, that'll absorb heat during the day, and the concrete itself will radiate heat during the night and keep plants warmer. In that case, you want to actually have them right down as close to the concrete as possible. You may still want to raise them up to keep the pots from staining the concrete, but don't raise them way up. If you can keep them within an inch or two of the concrete, that will help. Blacktop is actually fantastic for absorbing the heat during the day and radiating it at night. Some people use, out in the garden, use black plastic to help absorb heat, put it into the soil, and then it radiates at night. The plastic doesn't hold the heat at night, but it helps the soil heat up more, and then that means more radiation during the night. So those are all ways that you can cheat a little bit, at least early in the season. Later in the season, you want to be a little bit careful in that setting not to let them get too hot. For instance, if you put a plant like this in a black pot in a really hot spot in a south-facing deck, for instance, it can actually get too hot, and the roots can be damaged by the heat. So then again, it's important to have them up off of the deck so that air can circulate underneath them. And I've taken to growing the peppers in terracotta pots. They seem to have about the right temperature, the pot itself. They take a little more water because the pots are able to outgas some of the water vapor through the terracotta, but not a lot, and they seem to work very well. Pepper plants top out at about 3 feet, 90% of the varieties. So this is a regular old Calendar bell pepper, which is currently at about maybe 14 inches, something like that. So it could get twice as tall without too much problem. And it's sitting in a 2-gallon can. Volume-wise, it's probably a little less than that in reality, but that's what we call in the nursery business a 2-gallon can. This is what we call a 1-gallon can. You know, the reality is it's probably more like 3/4 of a gallon, something like that in volume. So you can see the difference there. And the 2-gallon can, I would say, is the minimum size or 2-gallon volume for growing a pepper for the entire season successfully. I generally upplant the 4-inch or 3.5-inch little peppers into a 1-gallon can for a while, let them fill the can with their roots, and then move them to their ultimate size container, which I would say should be about a 5-gallon can volume, like that. This is a standard nursery 5-gallon can. And this would be adequate for just about any pepper to grow for the entire season successfully. So you can see it takes less volume than a tomato plant. I recommend 15 gallons in order to grow it for the entire season, which is just about the volume of a 2 cubic foot bag of potting soil. That's how much a tomato takes. Whereas the pepper, you probably would get 3 plants out of a single bag of potting soil. Support is also not as necessary with peppers as with tomatoes. Since they keep branching out and they keep blooming at the ends of the little branches, every time they bloom, they have to branch again. And so they're more of a spreading kind of little tree-like form than the vining style of the indeterminate tomatoes, which can grow 10, 12 feet tall. Not to say that none of the peppers grow tall. I've seen pictures of them in greenhouses in, of all places, Finland, where they're 12, 18 feet tall. But I don't know what varieties those were. Finland, by the way, funny aside, is a hotbed for peppers, of all places. You wouldn't imagine it, but they're grown inside in greenhouses and in greenhouse windows in the house. And if you have access to the little outline that I made, there's a mention in resources of fatali.net. That's the Finnish seed company that has a vast array of pepper seeds available and very good descriptions of the different ones. And they even have little starter sets of 3 or 4 different types of seeds and suggestions for which ones are easier to grow and which ones are more difficult to grow or harder to germinate. It's a very informative and interesting website and kind of humorous as well. There is a pepper called a Fatali pepper, which is quite a hot Chinese pepper, I believe, a habanero type. Now, recently I was given a packet of seeds from the botanical interests of a Chinese type pepper called a habanada, meaning no heat. And this is a habanero type pepper where they've bred the heat out of it, but not the flavors, supposedly. And so I've started some seeds of the habanada to see how they work. The slight difficulty with most of the Chinese type peppers is that they are long season peppers. So just like tomatoes, you'll find that there are early season peppers, mid-season peppers, and late or long season peppers. And most of the habanero types and the really hot peppers are long season peppers. An early pepper will mature from planting the seedling this size to getting the first ripened fruit in about 60 to 70 days, which is comparable to early tomatoes. Mid-season will be in the 80 to 90 day range, and a long or late season will be 90 to 120 days. And if you do a little calculating, if it takes 120 days from planting out the ghost pepper to get ripe peppers, that's 4 months. And so if I put it out today, that's June, July, August, September. And that's under ideal pepper conditions, which we do not have anywhere in the Bay Area. So we have to add more days to ripeness for the fact that our nights are cold and the ripening process stops when the nights are cold. And so by the time I get any ghost peppers off of this, it will probably be October at least, and it might be getting cold enough that I'm going to have to bring it inside to polish off the final peppers on it. So I recommend earlier peppers. There's a whole group of peppers called the Cubans, which are among my favorites, which include most of the Italian frying peppers. They're sweet peppers, including the Jimmy Nardello, the Italian bullhorn. They're generally speaking long, thin peppers with very thin walls and thin skins, with maximum sweetness once they're ripe, and a flavor that just sort of jumps out at you. I'm fairly evangelical about the Jimmy Nardello pepper, which is an early pepper, a very productive pepper, and one of probably the nicest sweet pepper that I've ever encountered. We do have a restaurant in San Anselmo that makes a wonderful vegetable course of fried Jimmy Nardello peppers, and they're wonderful. Throw them on the barbecue, chop them up, saute them a little, put them in your scrambled eggs. Any way you use them fresh, they're delicious. There's another one called Bergamo, which is also easy to grow and does very well around here. And then there's the Cubano, which is a pepper that is grown in Cuba, but it's sweet, and all the other Cubano type peppers are probably related to that, but have been developed as longer, thinner peppers. Of course, Italy is famous for some nice hot peppers too, like the Calabrian peppers, which are wonderful. And Spain has its special peppers. They're the special peppers of the Basque region. Most of them have thick skins and require that you remove the skins. You can do that by roasting them. And I just stick them on a long fork and put them over the gas flame of the stove and kind of caramelize the outside, and then it peels off fairly easily. Now, in terms of planting little plants like these, we always want to give a little bit of instruction about how to go about planting, and there's nothing really special about peppers in that way. So if you're already well versed in this, pardon the little diversion here while we go through it. But when you buy a small starter plant like this and pop it out of its can, this one doesn't want to come, of course. Just proving that there's nothing staged about this. And this one's pretty well rooted. You can see that at this point, the roots have not only made it to the outside of the little root ball, but they've started to grow around in a circle, which is the only way they can grow once they get to the sides. And the good news is that along with each seedling comes a special tool called a label. And I'm gonna get myself a trash can here. And what you do with your special tool is just scratch up the root ball a little bit. I'll do it over on that side. I'm actually cutting the roots here. And I want to break the pattern of growing around the outside of the root ball and force them to branch out and grow into the new soil that they're going to live in. There's a secondary reason for doing this, which is I want to maximize the amount of surface area in the root ball so that the new soil has lots of nooks and crannies to join into the old root ball here, and so that we get good cohesion between the two and good communication, so the roots can grow into the new soil and water can move back and forth between the old soil and the new soil. So I'm not real gentle with it. I'm not trying to hurt it or mangle it, but I want to make sure that the roots are getting a little bit dangly here. And then I'm just gonna snip off the hangers, because I would probably just fold them up when I planted them anyway. So this will give them a chance to branch out and grow out. And so now we're ready to put it into its new home, which in this case is going to be the 1 gallon size can that it'll live in for about a month before it goes into the 5 gallon can. So I'm going to put a handful in there, and then I'm going to see what the height is. It needs a little more soil, another handful. And I'm using the Sloat organic potting soil here, which I find to be an excellent soil for most vegetable type plants. It contains quite a bit of moisture. It has quite a bit of fertility already in it. I always take some balanced, the E.B. Stone tomato vegetable food, which under the numbering system is 4-5-3, meaning 4% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, and what did I say? 3% potash. Those are the macronutrients for plants that they need the most of. So I put a couple of tablespoons of the fertilizer in and just mix it into the top few inches of the soil. It'll be ready for the plant when it gets to it. And then in he goes. It's about the right level now. Put another little tablespoon, mix it in with my potting soil so that the soil that goes around the plant has a little nutrition in it.
If you can't see it, it's like an inch below the rim of the pot. Just
Yeah,
so,
I
just
leave
so
it a little
everyone.
below the rim of the pot so
Yeah.
that there's some room for watering.
Mhm.
And I like to have handy a little piece of a bamboo stake so that I can just make sure that I haven't left any big air pockets anywhere. And it feels fine. And then I give it a little bang like that. And then I would water it well, and it would be happy for the next month in that container. If I was concerned about it, I might pinch off these bottom leaves way down here so that they're not sitting on the soil. That's a little bit of an invitation for funguses to migrate from the soil onto the leaves. And so I like to have a little bit of airspace between the leaves and the soil. So there, oh, and then very important, last step, put the label back in so that you know which pepper you have, because boy, they all look alike until they start producing the fruit.
You think you
Yeah.
could take some questions now?
Of
A
course.
couple questions? Okay.
Fire away.
Shannon, did you have some questions?
Yeah, we did have a couple of questions here. One of them, thank you, Dan, by the way, everything has been really wonderful and super interesting. One of the questions that's here is about, and I realize you're going to speak a little bit to animal repellent. Maybe we'll save that one for later. One of the questions was, when buying jalapeno peppers, some are very hot and others not so much. Is there something I can do with the soil, fertilizer, water, etc., that will make the ones I'm growing more on the milder heat level? You know, as in, like, if you leave it on the plant longer, will it allow them to get bigger? Do they get hotter, etc.?
Yes, they do get a little hotter as they mature. There are probably 50 varieties of jalapenos that are grown. And of course, they don't tell you in the supermarket what variety you're buying. And so you don't know whether you're getting a really hot one or a milder one. You can get jalapenos that have almost no heat in them and grow those. You can't really control the heat in the way that you grow it. That's pretty much genetically determined. It's possible that keeping them moister will dilute the capsaicins just a little bit. But pretty much that's a genetic feature, and your best bet would be to look for milder varieties of jalapenos. I will recommend for you, this book is mentioned on the outline, but this is The Field Guide to Peppers by Dave DeWitt and Julie Lamson. And it has very good descriptions of many varieties of peppers, with their heat levels, with their length to ripeness, and it's if you really want to do a little research so that you can buy seeds for a milder jalapeno variety, this would be a good resource for you. The fact is that there aren't very many varieties available at nurseries. We, for instance, have only been able to find jalapeno and a variety called early jalapeno. Well, there are lots more out there, but you have to start them from seed in order to get the variety that you really want. So if you become a real pepper fan, you should ease your way into starting peppers from seeds yourself, so that you get the varieties that you really like and that might be most successful in your particular spot. I'll take any more questions you have, Shannon.
Yeah.
And Then I'm gonna get seeds a little bit.
Okay, perfect. Let me give you at least one more here. Paul asks if peppers are planted too early or in the cold, colder months, will it end up stunting growth once the weather warms up?
Good question. It can, particularly if you plant them in the ground too early, where the ground is maybe in the mid to low 40-degree range. You can stunt them permanently. In a pot, that's less likely because they will warm up during the day, at least an adequate amount. And even though they'll cool down to close to air temperature at night, they'll grow through some growing during the day. If you have them in the ground when it's really cold, they probably won't even grow during the day. And you just have them sitting there subject to fungal and bacterial attack and insect and rodent attacks, and possibly stunting them from a growth perspective for the whole season. So I definitely recommend buying the peppers when you find them, because you don't know whether a particular variety is going to be back at your garden center or not. But then put them in the gallon container and grow them for, during the colder weather in the gallon container, move them to a warmer spot if you can, and keep the growth going even if it's relatively slow.
Hey, Dan, really quick, I'm sorry, since you're talking about the changeover from the small size that it comes in to the 1 gallon, then to the 5 gallon, is there a reason that you can explain, and maybe you did, about why even stopping at the 1 gallon, that eventually you're going to need to be in the 5 gallon, why not just go from the small 3.5 or 4 inch directly into the 5?
Okay. That's another great question. And yes, there is a reason for it. It's not random. This small volume of soil is much easier to control the watering in than this large amount of soil. If I have a 5 gallon pot with a tiny plant in it like this, that's only using a very small amount of the soil, I'm going to have a bunch of soggy soil that's not being used and is not biologically active, and it's probably going to sour on me, as well as the plant's going to stay too wet. Peppers like to be watered, but then they like to dry out a little bit before they get watered again. And the roots don't like to sit in water. And so the bigger pot has both temperature problems, it takes longer to warm up, and it has watering problems until the plant, once the plant has filled out the 1 gallon plant, the root system is big enough that it'll start to grow into the 5 gallon container very quickly. So in many, many situations, we recommend that plants be stepped up one size at a time rather than be the small plant being placed in the giant container for those reasons. And to me, I know that it's a better way to go from experience. My first reaction when I heard that was, well, wait a minute, if we put them in the ground, it's like they've got the entire world to grow in. Why do we have to do this with the containers? And I mean, the principal reason is we're trying to give these guys a head start in cooler weather. And we want the roots to be growing fast, and we want the top to start growing. And if we can warm up a little more during the day with the 1 gallon container, the roots are going to grow faster, and you're going to have more success than in the 5 gallon container. So that's it. Now let's talk about seeds, because I hope you're going to get into seeds. I said in the outline that I would show you the paper towel in the plastic bag on top of the refrigerator method. And it's a wonderfully simple method of starting small seeds like peppers or tomatoes. These are these habanadas. Excuse me, Jen, while I litter your floor. I'm going to turn this over so I have a nice contrast here. The habanada seeds were planted on, I wrote it down, the 10th of May in a wet paper towel. And if I can get the folds apart here, you're not going to really be able to see this, but I can tell you that they've already sprouted.
Yeah.
They have little roots coming out of them here. And the next thing that's going to come out of the seed is what's called the radical, which is the start of the green shoot. And as soon as I have green shoots here, then I'm going to transfer these into maybe a cell pack like this and let them grow a little bit in there before I put them in the gallon cans. So the methodology here is extremely simple. I have here a fresh paper towel. Fold those back up a little bit. So I have a fresh paper towel. Here are some shishito pepper seeds. You can soak them overnight. That'll probably make them sprout even faster, but it's really not necessary. There we go. They give us about what, 20, 25, maybe 20 seeds here in a packet. And we can pretty well expect that every one of those will germinate, probably 90% of them. Now we just sprinkle them down a little bit. Fold it over. Make sure it has adequate moisture. I don't want it soggy. I just want it a little bit wet. And then it's going to go in the plastic Ziploc bag. Hold it out, stick it in. The Ziploc bag keeps the humidity and allows it to transfer the water to the seed coat, and that gives the seed the signal that it's time to grow. I close it up, but not all the way. Leave about an inch and a half at the end of the Ziploc so that a little air can go in and out. And then I place it on top of the refrigerator as if. And of course, we know that the way a refrigerator works, it takes the heat out of the inside of the refrigerator and lets it out into the room, and it ends up in the upper reaches of our kitchens and happens to make just about a perfect temperature for starting seeds. We want a temperature between 70 and 80 degrees usually for sprouting seeds, and peppers respond to that very well. So that's one very easy way to do it. Another easy way would be to just take a seed starting mix like this EB Stone seed starter. It's basically just about 50% peat moss and 50% perlite, which is a puffed up sort of popcorn volcanic rock. And is fairly sterile. You don't want a really rich mixture for starting seeds because that's also a rich mixture for fungi and bacteria. And so we use a fairly sterile mixture for starting seeds, sprinkle the seeds in and just a little bit of the starter mix on top, kind of tamp it down so the seeds make good contact, a little water. And then again, I would put it on top of the refrigerator or in a windowsill, someplace that's nice and warm, and let them sprout there. Once they're sprouted, especially if you put 2 or 3 or 4 seeds in each section of a 6-pack like this. You may want to, once they've come up and so that you can take hold of them, you can kind of tease them out with a little toothpick or something so that you don't break them, and drop them into individual sections or into individual pots to grow them up a little more. Although having 2 or 3 together and letting them grow and then thinning out the weakest ones is a traditional way to do it, and it works quite well. So seed starting, I encourage, and it is marvelously easy. Also, I need to talk a little bit about grafted vegetables these days because they're becoming more and more popular, and peppers are available now in a grafted form. In the last few years, what happens here is that 2 peppers are grown, one that is selected for its really hardy rootstock, and then one which is the type of eating pepper we want, in this case, a jalapeno. And then the rootstock pepper is snipped off, and the jalapeno is snipped off, and they're stuck together, and there are special little clips they use to hold them together and let them grow, and they just fuse and callus together. And then you get the advantage of the strong rootstock with the jalapeno or whatever type of pepper that you're growing. And the rootstocks are designed to be more disease resistant, to be more tolerant of temperature extremes, and to give more vigor to the upper part of the plant. It is critical that the graft area, the graft scar, we call it, be planted above ground so that you can see it. If you bury it, then roots may grow out of the upper part, the scion, and then you're wasting the rootstock because you're getting roots growing out of the jalapeno. If you wanted that, you would just start a seedling. So make sure that unlike often we plant vegetables deep, but with grafted vegetables, you never want to do that so that the graft is always visible. And these days, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant are all available in a grafted form. And I think especially, there aren't very many varieties of peppers available yet, but if they become more available, then some of the longer season peppers would make good sense to try in a grafted form because they might actually speed up the development. So if the habaneros ever become available in grafted form, grab them. But I haven't seen them yet. So far, it's jalapenos and bell peppers. You see, this variety is called Big Red Beauty. We're probably all aware that bell peppers that are green are just unripe bell peppers. No, we're not all. No, Jen's shaking her head.
I didn't know
Okay.
that.
All bell peppers start out green, whether they are a red bell pepper, a gold, a yellow, or a green bell pepper. Ultimately, they ripen to whatever color they're described as. Most of them are red. And if you pick them immature, as are these, for instance, then you have a green bell pepper. These will get bigger and still be green. Almost every type of pepper starts out green. Some are almost white, but they almost always start out green, and then they ripen to their ultimate color. And they are not ripe until they reach that color. So one of the reasons that bell peppers have relatively little flavor is that they haven't been allowed to develop. They do ship better because they're a little tougher, and usually they're firmer because they haven't ripened yet. And so that may be why the industry has gotten us all to think that a bell pepper is supposed to be green.
but none of them are green when they ripen. Also, support. I should have said this with the grafted vegetables. It's pretty important once you get bigger than this to support them firmly with maybe a single stake that you tie it to, so that if the wind blows, it's not whipping it around on the graft. And I have seen a couple of tomato plants that broke at the graft that weren't firmly supported. And so I'm recommending to people that they stake all of their grafted vegetables so that it takes the stress off of the graft. Okay. Now, another kind of peculiar thing about pepper plants is that they have a built-in, I don't know what you'd call it, fruit volume monitor, let's call it, the fruit volume monitor. And what that means is they will set fruit up to a certain point, certain number of fruits for a given plant, and then they'll just stop. And they'll let those mature. And so the way that you get them to keep producing throughout the season is that you don't wait for every fruit to ripen. So you are going to want to have some green peppers, no matter what they are, whether they're green jalapenos or green bell peppers or whatever. You want to pick some green, some when they just start to color up, and allow some to color fully. It makes for a prettier plant, have multicolors, and it will make for more production in the long run. A plant like this is actually three plants in one pot. This is the way the grower grew them. But if this were a single plant, you would expect on a bell pepper to get about 20 bell peppers in the course of the season because they're so big. A smaller pepper like a jalapeno, you would expect 50 or 60 on a plant. And of course, we can't stop talking about peppers until we talk a little bit about New Mexico peppers, which are peppers that came up probably from Mexico, maybe in trade with the Indians in New Mexico, or maybe with the Spanish explorers. Nobody really knows. But a vast array of peppers have been developed in New Mexico. The most familiar to most of us is the Anaheim pepper, but there are probably 100 different New Mexico style chili peppers. Most of them are sort of long and relatively thin like that, and medium hot. There are some that are very hot that they've developed, but most of them are medium hot. This is an example, the New Mex Joe E. Parker. That's a kind of a typical New Mexico style pepper. And the University of Mexico is world renowned for its Pepper Institute, and they have been instrumental in developing a number of varieties that are used for agriculture to produce Anaheim type and New Mexico type chilies, which are often pickled. Sometimes they're stuffed, but have more and more uses in chili sauces. So growing in Anaheim is a good idea. Growing a Fresno is a sort of Cuban pepper on the hot side, not super hot, medium hot again. But Fresno's a Cuban, Anaheim is in New Mexico. The Nardello is an Italian Cuban that is very sweet. The banana pepper is a kind of yellowish, very sweet pepper that's fairly popular. I have a fellow who comes into this nursery every year and buys about 20 banana peppers. And grows them and loves them. There are also little round cherry peppers. And then there are two species that you very seldom see, well, three really. Capsicum baccatum is a pepper that grows in the Andes mainly. It's a little more cold tolerant, but very long season. I've grown them. The manzano pepper is a little round, quite hot red pepper, and there's an orange variety. And then Capsicum pubescens is one that's you almost never see. And Capsicum frutescens is primarily the Tabasco pepper that Tabasco sauce is made of. So they grown a lot in Florida and Louisiana. With that, I think I'll see if there are any more questions. And thank everybody for your participation.
Yes, we definitely have a few more questions, Dan. The few that really stand out are one about San Francisco growing, just because it's so overcast and cloudy, especially out closer toward the beach. You know, is there something that people should be doing differently since they're not getting those nice hot days that you would get in the East Bay or even in the North Bay? You know, are there different peppers that they should concentrate on when that is the case?
Yes, you definitely want to concentrate on the early peppers. So if you want to grow a hot pepper, get the variety called early jalapeno. And if you want to grow a sweet pepper, then get one of the Italian sweet peppers. They're all early season. That would be like the Nardello or the Bergamo, the bullhorn. Again, try to find a spot that's maybe a little bit protected from the wind if you're out there close to the water. Try to find a place where you get some reflected heat off of a wall, either a house wall or a fence that maybe faces south. Those are your best bets for those areas. Interestingly, the fog itself is not really a problem. Plenty of light energy gets through the fog to help the plants grow, and they can get enough energy to make the fruit. It's really the average daytime temperature and the night temperatures. And again, the good news there is your night temperatures aren't as cold as ours are here, even in Mill Valley, because the ocean moderates your nighttime temperatures just as it moderates your daytime temperatures. So if you can beef up the daytime temperatures just a little bit with some reflected heat and use early varieties, you will probably have some success. But don't expect to have the masses of fruits that somebody in a hotter climate will have.
Okay, makes sense. A couple last questions then. One, is it too late for seeds? Is it too late to start seed germinating? And then maybe you could speak for a minute about repellents, especially in the East Bay. I know that there's a lot of problems with raccoons and, rabbits and any other types of, small animals that kind of come creeping through. And, while you're busy fighting off insects and pests, somebody mows down your entire veggie garden. So maybe you could speak to those two things, if it's too late for seeds and how to save your crop.
Right. Well, it's not too late for seeds, especially of the earlier varieties. I may not have too much luck with my habaneras here, since they are a late season pepper, but I want to try them anyway. And the plants will look nice. But if you were to do your early habaneros now, or any of the early to mid-season peppers at this point, you have plenty of time. We have such a wonderfully long growing season here. And many of us have extended summers through October at least. And I usually go on a vacation trip in early October for a couple of weeks. So I
I come back in mid-October and often have another flush of peppers that have set in my absence and are ready to try to ripen. They may not all ripen into color, but they will get to at least to the green stage and big enough to be edible even in November. So it's a very nice long season. And in terms of animal predation, yeah, it's a problem. Apparently the leaves of peppers are pretty tasty to lots of different critters. I have one of those long bare-tailed skittering animals that runs around at night apparently and likes to eat the leaves of the peppers. And what I've done is make a little bonnet for each pepper out of bird netting to keep the rat out of the peppers. Yeah, otherwise, there are excellent animal repellents that you can get at any garden center to just spray on the leaves. They won't hurt the plant, they won't hurt your ability to eat the fruit. Most of them are either pepper sprays or they're rotten egg sprays, and they do a very good job. The pepper sprays seem to be more designed for the small animals, and the rotten egg are more for the rabbits and deer. There's also a blood-based one that's relatively new to us that's supposedly very effective. So repellents, you just have to remember to keep applying them. I mean, they do disappear, and the pepper sprays and the rotten egg sprays you have to apply about weekly in order to be sure that they're working. I think the blood spray is more like a month. So do use those. There aren't too many around here, too many diseases of pepper plants. We're really pretty lucky. One thing that does happen is you want to make sure that in any fertilizer you use, or if you don't use a fertilizer, where's the oyster shell, you want to make sure there's a source of calcium down in the soil at the time of planting. This tomato veggie food contains 3% calcium, which is the minimum that I recommend. And oyster shell is just a ton of calcium, 35% calcium. I will tell you that eggshells are not a good solution, even though they're full of calcium. That calcium is locked up in the eggshell and does not move to the soil for years unless you make it into a powder, which is not easy to do. But if you could powderize the eggshells, that would work the same way oyster shell powder works. But calcium is important because in a given, I'm going to take a fruit off here just to show you. The fruit is hanging on the stem, and here's a flower that was hanging on the stem. So the flower gets pollinated, and you can see inside the flower the ovary is already swelling. This one is has been pollinated, and that is going to turn into this pepper. The petals are going to fall off, but even in the end of the pepper, you can see that the pistil is still there from the flower. And so this is the flower end or the blossom end of the fruit, and this is the stem end. There's a disease called blossom end rot that tomatoes and peppers and squash get, that is primarily a lack of calcium, and it ends up forming a kind of ugly gray scab on the end of the fruit, which is very noticeable, and although it doesn't completely ruin the fruit, it ruins about half the fruit each time. And if you just have enough calcium in the soil, that won't happen. Occasionally you get it from inconsistent watering, too wet, too dry, too wet, too dry, over and over again. But mainly it's from a lack of calcium. So
Make sure you have some calcium in your fertilizer at the time of planting, or add a little bit from something like oyster shell. Very important. Okay. I think I'm talked out.
That was awesome.
Dan, that was amazing. Please visit Dan Alexander at our Mill Valley store. He is definitely our resident veggie guru. We really appreciate all the great information today, Dan. Thank you very much. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have numerous classes coming up. We've got next week, we're doing the growing succulents. How to grow berries is the week after that. We'll be working on some how to protect your garden during the drought. We've got that cool summer series with the cocktails. I'm telling you, you're going to want to sign up for that. Just a reminder that this recording will be posted by next Tuesday. So after a presentation, everything will be recorded the next Tuesday following that class. I think that's it. Feel free to forward any questions that you've got. We will try to answer everything even after the presentation is ended. We really appreciate you all joining us. Have a great day. Take care. See you next time.